Everyone, welcome to the MA's online conference. I'm Geraldine Kendall-Adams from the MA and I'll be facilitating this session, Power Up. I'll shortly hand over to our chair, Tony Butler, who is the Executive Director of Derby Museums. But before that, I have a few short housekeeping announcements to make. Please bear with me if you've heard them before today. Firstly, as attendees, your cameras and microphones won't be on, but you can use the chat function on your menu bar to introduce yourselves, talk to others, share links and experiences. You're also very welcome to tweet using the hashtag Museums2020. There is live closed captioning available at the bottom of your Zoom screens, as well as audio describing via the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Please switch to the French channel for the live audio description. If you have a question that you'd like the panel to address, then please share this via the Q&A function, which you should be able to see in the menu bar. You can ask a question anonymously, but if you're happy to, then please do share your name and organisation. The chair will put selected questions you've asked to the panel. Please keep these short and to the point to help them out. You can leave and rejoin the webinar at any time. We are recording this session and it will be available on our website in due course. And finally, please bear with us if there are any technical problems during the webinar. I think we've all got used to those over the past few months anyway. Feel free to send me a private chat message if you have any troubles and I'll do my best to help. Right, now it's time to hand over to our panel and Tony to get started.
Right. Hello, everyone. It feels very, very odd to be talking to people I can't see. So I'm pretending there's thousands and thousands of you there listening to the pearls of wisdom we're going to have for the next hour or so. And it does seem quite ironic that here we are talking about how to generate the power and influence in our museums in a week where we're all going to be working towards closing them for 4 weeks. That is, if you're in England. So today I've got 3 brilliant museum leaders who with me, and we're going to be exploring how to use that power and influence, because often I don't think we recognise the power we do have in shaping the public realm and the power we have to influence thinking by decision makers. So we're going to be exploring the potential for museums to reshape the civic life in the towns and cities, and hopefully some really interesting thinking around how we do that in a post-COVID context. That might include the reimagining of the high street or the use of cultural heritage in healing. But fundamentally, this is about providing some practical tips and guides and discuss the skills that you need to explore how you can be a successful advocate. Because ultimately, if you're not at the table, you could be on the menu. So with me today are Morag McPherson, who's the head of cultural services at Renfrewshire Leisure in Scotland. We should be in Edinburgh, so this is sort of 40 miles west of where we should be today. Lynn Dunning, who's the group leader for Arts and Heritage at Barnsley Council, and Emmy Kell, who's the chief executive of the Cornwall Museums Partnership. So I'm going to start with a question I'm going to ask all the speakers. So I will come to Morag first, if that's all right. Could you just tell me how you got yourself into a position of influence? Because just being a CEO or director doesn't automatically confer the power to influence others.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and hello, everybody. I think I would suggest in my case, it was definitely a case of right place at the right time. So I think a lot of the influence that I've been able to bring to my role has been around helping to shape something that was already really established as a commitment. So maybe a little bit different to some of the scenarios that other people will be discussing and the challenges that other people in the panel will be sharing. But I was really fortunate to come into post at a point 5 years ago where a major commitment had been made to town centre regeneration through cultural heritage, and in particular to establishing Paisley Museum redevelopment project as the flagship project of that regeneration. So I guess just to explain Renfrewshire, which is difficult to say to anybody who doesn't know it, it's just right next door to Glasgow. It's a local authority with a population of just under 180,000. There's a number of towns and villages, and the biggest one is Paisley with a population of 77,000. So we're working very much at a town scale, which is quite interesting for me, having previously worked in city services. We're going through a real period of transformation and ambition. Paisley did bid to the UK City of Culture in 2021, and we lost out to Coventry, who I'm hoping are looking forward to delivering their Year of Culture next year. We currently have, within our service area, my service area, cultural services, we're actually taking forward 4 capital projects, totaling £75 million, including the £42 million redevelopment of Paisley Museum, which is led by a separate project team. The project director, Kirsty Devine, there is leading on that specific project. So I manage the museum service, the arts team, the libraries and the venues. And in terms of what has kind of brought me into that role, I previously worked as the manager of the Open Museum in Glasgow, working with communities to create content. I managed learning communities for Tyne and Wear, archives and museums. And there's some really ambitious, exciting work going on at that time with regional programmes, creative partnerships, the Our Museum programme through the Paul Hamlin Foundation. And I've also been research and development lead for Museums Galleries Scotland on a maternity cover basis before this role. So I think, I'm sure anybody in a learning and outreach role will relate to this. I was kind of over ready to take decisions and get my hands on something more organisational sized, if you like. And just by way of encouragement to anyone in this position as well, I think when I'm outlining my career path, I think it's useful to highlight that I did start my first job after university. I worked front of house at Kelvingrove for 4 years, 4 long years, trying to get my foot in the door, and it did take a while. And I think it's maybe a point about influence throughout your career. It's not necessarily a sort of steady trajectory, or you don't always get a kind of evolving set of opportunities. Sometimes you're just right place, right time, and you get that opportunity and the doors open. Other times, you know, you can feel a bit stuck and frustrated in some ways. And so when I came into this post, it was just a few months after the regeneration team had established the capital project, Paisley redevelopment of Paisley Museum. So I was fortunate in that I was the first person to be brought into the conversation of what is this museum going to be, and they were actually looking for somebody to shape that at that point. So I was able to say, let's create a story-led, co-produced museum. And I guess, interestingly to me at that point in my career, that was just completely accepted, embraced, and decided on by, you know, everybody involved that would be the right direction. And I think there's also an interesting point there about sometimes the kind of bigger influences you have don't necessarily take the most effort, you know. So it's not the case that there's more effort equals more influence. Sometimes it's just that opportunistic moment. There was a little bit more effort involved in making the case for how long it was going to take to deliver a capital project like that. And yeah, sorry.
Can I ask you that in particular, in a bit further down the session, if that's, because I've got lots of questions I'd love to ask around the capital programme. Yeah. If I could come to Lynn, how did you get yourself in that position of influence?
Well, in Barnsley, I started working for the council in 2001, which is a scarily long time ago. But I started as an assistant manager, which I was fooled into thinking it was a curatorial role, but when I got there, it was actually an operational role at one of the venues. And at that time, the museum service was very disparate. It was very broken up. The sites all had individual managers. And it was really clear to me, the museum's manager left after a year, and I got the opportunity to step up. And it became really clear to me that we had to bring all these sites together. We needed to bring these museums together, create a really strong brand, and that we would have a more collective voice rather than individual sites sort of trying to make their case or fight for what they wanted. It's been a really interesting journey building that service up and creating a service that's now got a really strong voice in the local authority. And I think Barnsley Council truly does put culture at the heart of its decision making, but that's been a long journey. It takes a lot of determination. You have to have a really clear vision. strong advocacy is absolutely vital, and you have to develop an ability to be less modest, which is, I think, something that a lot of us in museums, we're just far too modest. And I guess, you know, strong partnerships are absolutely critical as well, but we'll come on to exploring some more of that, no doubt, as we go along.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Lynn. And Emmy, how did you get yourself to where you are now?
Well, I'm going to say some more about what my current job is in a minute. So my reflections on this question were more about the kind of personal qualities and approaches that I think, if I'm being honest, I personally have used. And I think it's true to say that there are CEOs and directors who are very influential, and there are others that aren't, and a job title doesn't necessarily, as you've said, Tony, in your introduction, confer the power to influence others. I can think of freelancers and consultants and independent operators who are very influential. And I probably I've spent about 10 years of my career as a consultant before I was CEO at Cornwall Museums Partnership. And I think I've probably employed these kinds of traits and approaches in both roles. So I think in order to be influential, I think being genuinely curious and outward facing and really genuinely trying to develop networks is really important. And you can do that as a CEO, or you can do that as a freelancer, or you can do that at a different level within an organization. I think I've always tried to be helpful and constructive for others in those networks, and that, you know, there is payback that comes from that. So, you know, you are able to call in favors at times. I think you have to have something to say, and that, you know, and that has to be said with clarity and conviction, and that comes from being able to talk with conviction based on evidence. So that you know, you have to have a vision that you can rally people around. I think you have to be visible and you have to be audible. So what I have learned, it's a bit, you know, in relation to what Lynn's saying about being less modest, is there's no point being at a meeting if you don't say something. And sometimes for those of us who are a bit more introverted and a bit shy, don't necessarily like being put on the spot, you have to kind of, you know, gear yourself up to do that, but you have to have something sensible to say. So I think you have to be visible and audible, but most importantly, I think you have to be really, really clear about what your values are, and you have to communicate those really clearly. And the people whose values align with yours will then gravitate towards you. And that's how you create a critical mass and start to get that influence going.
Brilliant, thank you. Fantastic. So I'm going to put some questions to each of you about your own sort of individual work and the places you work. I'm going to start with Lynn. Now, you've been really successful in advocating for culture and heritage Barnes, and you know, it's absolutely visceral. Clearly, Barnsley Council do like culture, and they're very supportive, and there is that real spirit of joy and heritage in when you go into Barnsley. I think that's really evident for anyone to see. So I'd like to know how you got your council to love museums.
Well, it's certainly not something that happens overnight unless you're very, very lucky. And, you know, as I said, it's been great to be involved in this journey from a council that didn't love culture, actually sort of really saw its museum venues as liabilities. But there are some really simple things that you can do. 20 years has been a long time invested in Barnsley, but there's some really simple things you can do straight away. And one of the most important things for me was to really clearly align ourselves with the council's priorities and with its strategies. And that really isn't difficult as a museum service, because we're essentially all trying to achieve the same things: a strong economy, support educational attainment, support health and well-being, job creation, helping our communities become more resilient and stronger. So in Barnsley, we started by making the economic argument, because at that time, that was what people were really listening to: the economic impact of visitor attractions, of museums, of the potential of visitor economy, all the businesses that we support, the supply chains, etc. So it was really important to talk the language of the decision makers and show them what our economic value was, and then move towards demonstrating what we could do for communities. So it was that hard-hitting arguments at first around the economy that really made people sit up and go, oh, actually, yeah, I see what you mean. And the creation of an opening of the Experience Barnsley Museum in the Town Hall in 2013 was a massive turning point for us, because that was something in the heart of democracy, right under the nose of all the decision makers. It was hugely popular with stakeholders, with members of the public, with the media. It was one of the first things the council did. The media was completely behind, the local media, creating a museum to tell the story of Barnsley, because we didn't have that. And the council leader became very quickly convinced that this was a great project and was really spearheading it and behind that. And as I say, saying that it was one of the most popular things council had ever done. It really made people proud of their hometown, and it really opened the door for further funding for culture in Barnsley. So it's been a bit of a struggle up till that point, but then really, we established that track record with the funders, but more importantly, demonstrates to the council what culture could achieve for communities and the profile that it could bring, and really made them believe that culture was something that was worth taking seriously. And that all culminated in us becoming a national portfolio organisation in 2018, which, I never would have dreamt that would have been possible in the past. Always sort of looking at the bigger services like Sheffield and Leeds and thinking, oh, we could never be as good as them. So it just shows you that you can. But my quick top tips before I pass on would really be, be the good news, be the solution to the problems that your council's trying to deal with. When I started in Barnsley, I say they were a liability, so I considered a liability. So I had to change that narrative and really be in control of the messaging. You've got to build those strong relationships with your funders, but don't just hold those relationships to yourself. Involve the decision makers in those relationships, your leader, your CEO, your cabinet member. Provide them with robust briefings. Tell them what you want them to say. They want to look good, so give them the ammunition. Go for awards. Councils love awards. Spin every positive opportunity. And use museum accreditation. When I started out, we didn't even have a curator. I thought I was coming to be that curator, but I wasn't. So we used museum accreditation to make the argument for investment and got Barnsley's first dedicated curator. Generally do want to meet or exceed standards. They don't want to be bad at something. And always have your elevator pitch ready. Don't be shy. I always create opportunities nowadays to bump into decision makers. So never waste an opportunity to tell them something really positive about you. But don't give up, and don't ever think we've done it, we've achieved it, we can't be complacent. We've got to keep making that case, and creating strong advocates all around you. And we'll probably touch on that a little bit later in the conversation as well.
Right, thanks. Can I just ask, and I wonder if this will resonate for anyone that does work within a local authority, is how you kind of cut through the competing interests of other departments, because councils are multifaceted and everyone is competing for their pitch. So you're both collaborating and competing against other departments. So I wonder what you do to make your voice heard within that setup.
I think it's always demanding to have demanding that you have the equal stage to other departments, and not being hung up on the idea that because you're not a statutory service that you can't make the case or be influential. I mean, absolutely, for us now, the icing on the cake is commissioning. We've got to the point now where council services have listened to what we've got to say. They've seen the robust evidence that we've able to present them. They've seen the response from funders and partners and from our visitors to what we do, and actually now they can see that culture is an alternative vehicle for providing services. And so we're just testing some of that at the moment across the borough, commissioning work with troubled families, delivery engagement programs around the council's climate change agenda. So it really is, it can be a slow burn, it doesn't happen overnight, but you've got to be really robust in your arguments and really have your fingers on the data and the evidence. Evidence is so important.
Thank you. So you're sort of advocating both within and without the organisation constantly, and changing your sort of tactics.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks. Brilliant. I'm going to turn to Morag. So I'm really sorry for cutting you off your earlier answer, but I wanted to save all the stuff about the redevelopment of Paisley Museum and the City of Culture for now, really. So you've described earlier that you're in the mix of the City of Culture, which you lost out to Coventry the Midlands, but you maintain that council's commitment for Paisley Museum. So I wonder what you did to keep the momentum going, and how you've really promoted the value of museums and heritage within Renfrewshire.
Yeah, I think to echo the point that Lynn, or quite a few of the points Lynn was making, I think that validation is really important, whether it's through accreditation or some other kind of external support or community support. I think that ongoing kind of buy-in from different people is so important. So I guess when I started as well, some consultants had been brought into Paisley to look at town centre regeneration, and there had been a few failed cycles of different approaches, like establishing discount shopping experiences and all sorts of things that hadn't played out. And they noticed the potential of the museum, basically, in the museum collections, and then really built that into the kind of, it became central to the whole regeneration strategy. And I think the fact that was seen by people from outside is quite important. And then similarly, through the City of Culture process, I mean, that kind of tests the waters in lots of ways when you embark on a kind of community-wide, stakeholder-wide partnership, to bring people together and almost to see what's there. And I think what we got back really from the wider community was just huge support and enthusiasm and excitement around the potential, and a feeling that the telling of those stories was just long overdue, and the realising of the potential was long overdue. So that kind of helps validate, I guess, what you're trying to do, if you like, from within the kind of cultural team and the cultural services and so on. And so I think that validation is just really critical, and being able to get that however you can, from wherever you can. I think don't underestimate the power of external voices in that process. And then I guess from that point, it would have been an option for the council to say, oh well, never mind, we didn't win, so we're not going forward with that on that path. I think that community voice was so strong, and also I think there has been a long-term commitment to change through culture, and particularly the cultural infrastructure. I think the challenge in that is that it takes such a long time to deliver. So we started in 2015, it'll kind of be 2023 by the time it's delivered. That's an 8-year process designed to reinvigorate the town centre and the high street. And what's interesting is, in terms of retail patterns from 2015 to 2023, you can see there's like a huge shift just within that time period. So I think a challenge and the influence that we, I guess, are working on just now is making sure that people don't lose sight of the end goal, and remember what is there to be delivered. That's really encouraging, Lynn, to hear about that transformative effect that that your project had in 2013, because that's what we're working towards. So I think that 5 years in and 3 years still to go, it is a challenge sometimes, just to remind people that it's not something that we've done and it hasn't worked out. It hasn't actually been delivered yet. So there's quite a lot of momentum to keep up there.
Great. So I'm quite interested in the fact that both Paisley and Barnsley are are next to much bigger cities. So I wonder how you've gone about, Maura, carving that niche for Paisley. Well, for Paisley in particular, obviously you encompass the whole county, but for Paisley in particular, in the sort of shadow of Glasgow.
Yeah, I think largely it's a huge benefit to have a big city right next door, with all that brings in terms of cultural organisations, potential partners, artists, creatives. A lot on your doorstep. So I guess a beacon for us is Dundee, which has gone through a cultural regeneration process over the past couple of decades, really. But Dundee is very different geographically in terms of it's quite isolated. It's reasonably far from the nearest big city. It's kind of between Edinburgh and Aberdeen, and I guess we've got Glasgow right on our doorstep. I think what that does provide is a bit of dynamism, if you like, for Paisley's identity. So it's very much, we're not Glasgow, and there's something to kind of be established there. And if any local area, the next town is also keen to make sure we understand that they're not Paisley, you know, so these identities are really important. And also Paisley is quite clearly, in terms of its architecture and its town centre, not a neighbourhood of Glasgow, it is a town centre. So I think largely it's, you know, it's a huge advantage to have a city on your doorstep.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to thanks, Mark. I'm going to turn to Emmy now. Like you're in a very different position to Lynn and Morag, and you're the first CEO of the Cornwall Museums Partnership, and you're also a board member of the Cornwall Local Enterprise Partnership, which is, you're probably a very almost unique in museum person being on a LEP board in England. So can you tell me why the Museum Partnership was set up, how you managed to get on the LEP board as well, and how that's benefited museums and for you to make that strategic case across the region?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the reasons for CMP being set up is because we don't have what Morag has described. We don't have the benefit of a big city on our doorstep. We have a network of over 70 museums that are very dispersed across a large rural region. So I'll tell you a bit about CMP, and then I'll tell you some very practical things about how I got on the LEP board and what I think the advantages are. So Cornwall Museums Partnership is an independent charity. It was set up in 2015 to support all museums in Cornwall, and our purpose is to create positive social change with museums. And the charity came about initially as a result of a small number of museums who were experimenting with a collaborative approach designed to address some of the distinctive characteristics of the museum sector in Cornwall. In other words, it was conceived of as a means by which to address some of the long-term strategic issues that were holding the sector back. So we've always had a kind of focus on things like, you know, big strategic issues like workforce diversity, good governance, helping museums to be more open and connected to the people they serve. And advocacy, or making the case for museums, has been a core part of our work since the very beginning, really, because it's the thing that quite often falls off the agenda for busy, smaller museums who are dealing with operational issues, firefighting on the, you know, literally on the museum floor, like a lot of small businesses themselves. So I think cultivating support and supporters of museums has been a strategic objective of our charity, and I wanted to draw attention to that because I think we've invested 5 years in that work, and if you want to influence, you need to have something to say, and we've spent a long time thinking about what we want to say about the benefit of museums. So that's a bit of background about CMP. In terms of the LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership, for those of you who aren't in England, there are 38 of them in England. They're all slightly different, created by government to drive local economic growth with slightly different arrangements in the devolved nations. I got a place on the board, so I'm a non-exec director of the Local Enterprise Partnership as a result of an open recruitment process, which was run by recruitment consultants. And I'm fairly sure that most LEPs do that. I had to complete an application form and I had to attend an interview, which is quite hard, actually. It was a competitive process. I would not have applied had it not been for the fact that somebody at Cornwall Council suggested that I did. So I wouldn't have considered myself kind of LEP material, but I'm really, really glad that I did apply. I thought it would be, so they bent my ear a bit and persuaded me to put in an application. I did it because I thought it would be a good learning experience. It would help me to access decision makers and influencers, like Lynn was saying, you know, be in the right place at the right time. And I'd actually cared about what the LEP was trying to do. So I didn't really set out to make the strategic case for museums. I set out to be a credible and effective LEP board member. And I think that is an important distinction. So I've been doing that now for 5 years. My focus has been on the creative economy, so helping to quantify and communicate the impact and potential of the creative industries. So that includes museums and galleries, but it's not limited to them. And I think in answer to your question, the LEP board role has enabled me to shape policy and strategy in a way that's helped to raise the profile of the creative industries, including museums. It's a reasonably high profile role, which has given me, and in turn Cornwall Museums Partnership, a higher degree of visibility. So I get invited to stuff in a way that I wouldn't have done before. It's helped me to develop new connections and relationships and understand better. So I think this picks up on Lynn's point earlier, the language, priorities and processes of some of the people that we're seeking to influence. So I think those are sort of consequences of the LEP role, which have enabled me to be more effective in my CEO role as an advocate for museums. But I'm really clear that being a LEP board member requires me to be an advocate of the LEP. And just as I would expect any board member of CMP to be an advocate of CMP and act in the best interests of CMP, I'm clear that my agenda at the LEP is to act in the best interest of the LEP and deliver its priorities. So whilst I didn't take the LEP role with an agenda to advocate for museums specifically, I have been able to influence and shape policy in a way that's created a framework in which museums can legitimately be considered as economically advantageous. I wish we had the scenario that Lynn was describing she has in Barnsley, because I've just come out of a meeting this morning where people were arguing that investing in museums was nice, but not something that we could do at the moment, and we're prepared to kind of confer economic outputs on other projects that weren't, you know, largely different to what museums were going to do, just on the basis of the fact that they weren't in the cultural sector. So there's something specific there about why people find it really hard to see the cultural sector as an economic advantage. So, you know, I haven't made it to Lynn's position yet. I've still got lots of people to win over. I've also been able to help ensure that key documents like the local industrial strategy and previous economic strategies reference museums, even sometimes if it just means that they've got a picture of a museum in them. That makes a difference, actually. I've been able to help educate decision makers through case studies and examples where relevant about the social impact of museums, and I can interrogate and challenge economic data and the assumptions that are drawn from it to ensure that policy is built on accurate and informed evidence. And alongside policy and strategy, I've been able to develop an effective network outside the museum sector, and that's helpful in all sorts of ways. It's helped us to develop some really interesting new collaborations, accessing new skills and resources, generating new projects. And I've been able to help LEP board members. Again, I haven't necessarily achieved all I need to achieve yet. It is a long game, but I've been able to help them understand better the 21st century role of museums and challenge some preconceptions. I'd say it's a long game. Change doesn't happen overnight, needs persistence, positivity and patience. And as other people have said before, you've succeeded when you hear your own words quoted back at you, which happened to me about a month ago. And I've been doing this for 5 years, so.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And that's a great way to end that section. I would say that the Cornwall Museum Partnership annual review is probably the most attractive and user-friendly annual review publication that I've seen. So clearly the message of the benefits of museums in Cornwall is absolutely getting out. There's a couple of questions on the chat function. I'm going to ask one from I think, oh, can't see who it's from, but Geraldine sent it on to me. This is really about momentum, and the three of you have described the energy and the kind of dedication that you're showing to the work. But I wonder how what you do when you encounter opposition or blocking to something that you care about so passionately. Who wants to dive in first?
Yeah, I'm happy to say, I mean, that happens a lot. It happens a lot. But you have to also decide which battles are worth fighting, which is something that my manager said to me quite a lot, and I've learned over the years to pick my battles. And sometimes things, you just got to let them. You've got to let them go. But it's just that continual sort of, like what I was saying earlier, continually making the case. Just you've got to continue to believe in what yourselves and what your team can deliver and what culture can do, and just keep making the case. But as I was sort of saying, I said just before this started, don't whine and don't complain, because that's where things start to go wrong. So you've got to keep that positivity and just keep showing what you can do and the difference you can make, and use that data. It can be disheartening at times working within a big local authority where there's so many priorities, and it's a very, very difficult time. It has been for a long time, and it's even more difficult now, but you've just got to you've got to keep positive and think about what you really believe in and the difference you can make.
I think as well, Tony, sometimes the challenge is you can live with decisions if you feel that you've been heard and that different cases have been weighed up, and then people, because of the interests that they have to serve, have made a decision either way. I think sometimes, particularly in large complex organisations, the challenge can be making that case where it needs to be heard. So both Emmy and Lynn have just referred to the value of being able to make contact with the decision makers, and almost engineer opportunities to be able to do that. And I think that's part of the challenge sometimes, is just getting into the right place to make the case is almost as much of a challenge as making the case itself.
Right. Yeah. And we've got a question directly for you around, you mentioned the learning the language, priorities and processes of your stakeholders. Can you think of any ways in which that language might be a barrier, and how do you overcome that?
I mean, yes, it often is. And how do I overcome it? I think it goes back to what Lynn was saying before. It's, you have to be ready to be the solution to other people's problems. Positioning and, kind of articulating your offer in a way that lands and is understood by the stakeholders that you're dealing with. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think that it's always worth asking more questions. So I think quite often I'm guilty of assuming things and conferring view or projecting views onto certain stakeholders that they might not actually have. So I'm trying to school myself to ask more questions, to really get under the skin of what they're about and what the difference is that they want to achieve, and what their priorities are. And I think in doing that, you can then develop your case more effectively. I think it's I can't think of anything that's been a specific problem. I think it's just, as I say, I've been in a meeting this morning. It's repeatedly difficult. And particularly at the moment, I don't know if anybody who's on the webinar is involved in the Towns Fund programme. That is a real challenge, not just because of the timing, but the governance and the lack of capacity that organisations have got to respond, and the way in which museums and cultural organisations are trying to navigate that is really throwing up some specific challenges. So yeah, I don't know that I've got any words of wisdom other than it's just positivity, persistence, keep going.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question now about how you support others. So I've noticed that there are 361 participants in this call, and not everyone is going to be necessarily in a senior role in an organisation. But I've a great believer in Julia Middleton's words around leading beyond authority. So I wonder if you could all say a few words on how you can support others to be advocates and to help them lead beyond their authority. Can I start with Morag?
Yeah, I think when I came into post, as I said, the services had just transferred from the council to what had been purely a leisure trust and was becoming a culture and leisure trust. And that gave real scope for people to act much more entrepreneurially. but that really had to be kind of signalled and encouraged to people. And I mean, I can't say it entrepreneurially in the widest sense, in terms of like, take a chance, try something out, learn from it. You know, if it goes wrong, that's okay. You know, as long as we learn something from it, and we can develop on from it. And I think the impression I got was that that was quite new to people, to be encouraged in that way. So I think building that kind of culture of sharing the learning from what goes well and what goes wrong can give everybody a place, because everybody can innovate, everybody can bring new ideas, everybody can drive forward the practice in different ways. So I think trying to create that kind of culture of trying things out and sharing what works and what doesn't work, and supporting people where things don't go as well as planned, not leaving them to feel that they're on their own with that, I think is important. And I guess there's some kind of basics about just recognising good practice and celebrating success. And also just, I think you used the term earlier, Tony, about recognising the power that we all have. So even, you know, we recently had a session about volunteering, and I was just encouraging the team to think about the power of being able to offer volunteering opportunities at this time, when a lot of people will, you know, experience unemployment or experience different challenges, where just being able to reconnect with something that's personally meaningful to you could have a massive impact for people. So I think, you know, there's all sorts of ways in which people can lead. And I think it's about really understanding the innovation in the practice, seeing the good practice, and being able to kind of amplify that in different ways.
Right, thanks. Emmy, you've come off mute, so can I ask you next?
Yeah, well, I say the first thing is get everybody a copy of the Julia Middleton book that you referred to, because it's brilliant. We have that in the CMP office on our bookshelf. I think it's called Leading Beyond Authority.
Leading Beyond Authority.
Yeah, excellent book. You know, that helped to underpin and inform lots of what we've done in terms of the setting up of Cornwall Museums Partnership, and our kind of you know, our effort to maximise the power of the network. So how can we support others to be advocates? I think being on a board is really good experience. Actually, it does help you to look at how other people are advocating for an organisation, and learn how to do that yourself. I think getting involved in networks outside the museum sector is really helpful to broaden your understanding of different agendas, see how people observe how people describe their work and how they influence other people. I went through a phase of going to business breakfast just to look at how people introduce themselves, quite interesting. And the guy who runs Surfers Against Sewage, who's an excellent advocate for that charity, was really, really smart in the way he introduced himself. And he would always talk about how many jobs that their charity had created. And actually, I thought, what am I doing? We've created the same number at CMP. Why am I not saying this in my introduction? So that was a good thing to do. I think in terms of what I try and do in my role is give other people on the team opportunities to practice their public speaking, helping them to refine their message, sharing a platform. Other people have been generous enough to do that for me, and I think it's my responsibility to do it for others. I think practically speaking, sharing tools and resources and, you know, around the data is really helpful. So how to write a good template letter, or, you know, how to prepare an infographic or a short film that has impact. Somebody's already mentioned coaching in the chat bar, but I think coaching is a really good tool to build confidence, and is a really great investment in leadership training. And that's something we're trying to hang on to at CMP, and we're thinking about how we can build in the costs of training into every project budget, that coaching that every project budget that we develop from now on. So yeah, those are my observations.
Thank you. Lynn.
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition to that, people need to feel valued as part of your organisation, your whole team. And if they feel valued and they enjoy what they're doing, then they're going to be natural advocates for what you're trying to achieve. And Barnsley Council, I sound like I should be getting paid by Barnsley Council. Barnsley Council has a great policy of supporting the development of leaders at every level. They've done this over the last few years. So not only investing in leadership training for people who are already in leadership positions, but looking at it across the whole organisation and really trying to sort of, so that everyone can kind of better understand their role and how that can contribute to better outcomes for our community. So big focus on future leaders, a big investment in workforce development generally, but also becoming an MPO gave us additional resource to free people up, to have opportunities to, from our front of house team, for example, to take part in curatorial secondments, for them to take on ambassadorial roles in things that interested them, be that retail or providing the best access that we could to services. And I think, you know, it's so important to, I regularly meet with the front of house team. Really, I think they're so important and vital to our organisations, and to get their views on how things should be done, because they're there every day talking to the customers, hearing the experiences. So that's been really, really important for me, to listen to what they've got to say to me and enact some of the stuff that they want to do, and they become, you know, natural advocates for you, which are completely different positions 20 years ago, when the team just kind of thought they were there to you know, to guard the precious things. But yeah, I mean, you need that wonderful sort of internal advocacy, and then all the other stuff which we could talk about for hours around external advocacy and the importance of all those external advocates.
Great, thank you. There's quite a lot of questions in the chat box, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through all of them. So if I don't mention your question, I do apologise now. We'll try and get through to as many as I can. There is one in the Q&A box, which is quite interesting, and this is from Ruth Bellamy, who says, my experience is that there's a lack of representation from the cultural sector backgrounds in local councillors. Do the panel think we should be encouraging more from the museum sector to stand for election? And that's from Ruth Bellamy, who is also a parish councillor. So, you know, she's walking the talk, as well as a museum professional. What can we do to get people elected?
I'm not sure that it's an interesting question. I'm not sure that that's the answer. I think if we feel that the only way we can make ourselves understood is to kind of like have some of us on the other side, I think you know, that would be a kind of never-ending process, really. I think it's, you know, maybe just more about some of the things we've referred to already. It does take patience, and it does take time to create that understanding where people don't have a background in what you do, or where they don't have the natural language to kind of step into the space that you already inhabit and understand. But if you do make the time and effort, it is worth it to get those advocates on side, and to have that breadth of perspective in your own work as well. You know, councillors can sometimes provide a very good challenge to what we do and the way we work, because they see things differently, and that's also really important as well. Thanks.
There's quite a lot of interest in what does actually coincide with my last question, so I think we might want to dwell some time on this. And this is about the vision for museums right now in the current situation, but also the kind of vision that we're creating for museums in a post-COVID world. So you've all talked about the really important civic role that museums have within our communities from a whole range of you know, public policy areas. So I wonder if you could all, each of you, perhaps describe a way in which you think culture will play, what kind of role culture is going to play in the recovery of city and town centres, and how do you think you'll make the case in your localities? Can I start with Emmy?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think as a charity that exists to create positive social change with museums, we're interested in helping museums to deliver impact in a range of different areas, including enhancing well-being, tackling rural isolation, providing rewarding work, routes to work, generating town centre footfall, and helping to contribute to a strong sense of place, which we know is an element of happier communities. Each of these things is important, and will major on different aspects of that positive social change, depending on the partnerships that we're seeking to develop and the opportunities that arise. So there's a you know, all of those, there's a kind of basis for all of that, you know, that difference and change that we want to see, but we will be opportunist in the way that we pursue different partnerships. Our research in June this year, so we commissioned some independent public attitudes research, showed that there is a real and increasing public appetite for museums as restorative and contemplative places, safe spaces. So I think there's more that we can do to emphasise the importance of this role in the growing mental health pandemic. But probably what's top of my list, which might be quite different to, or it may not be, to other people on the webinar, is the climate crisis and the role of museums and other parts of the civic infrastructure, the role that they can play in galvanising action as well as combating eco-anxiety. And I think that comes out of the experience we've had in Cornwall this year, and the urgency of a sustainable or regenerative model for tourism. And that's really come to the fore, and, you know, including last week, which was really busy in Cornwall, remarkably so. The volumes of tourists this year have placed a particular pressure on communities and on the environment. And I think there are people who are legitimately asking questions about museums with a business model based on volume, not value, and whether they are part of the problem and not the solution. So we're looking to pilot place-based approaches which put museums in the driving seat of sort of locally led partnerships to engage whole communities in approaches to sustainable tourism. And we'll be making the case that as a vital element of the civic infrastructure, museums can help to connect locals and tourists to a sense of place that cultivates respect for both people and the planet. So I think that's, you know, kind of where we're likely to be placing lots of our energies.
Great, thank you very much. Maury.
Thanks. I think it's a really interesting question in terms of anticipating what a post-COVID world will be, because obviously we're not there yet. And I think we can anticipate that when things get back to some kind of normality, that actually we'll have had really quite deep sort of shocks and traumas in different parts of society, some of which may never recover. So it's really difficult to anticipate exactly what the answer is. I think the key to it maybe is about how responsive and adaptive we can be to that changing landscape. One of the kind of key strands that we have at the heart of our work is trying to be useful to local communities. And I think there's something about how sharply focused your usefulness is. You know, do you have to reassess where you thought you can be useful before? Do you have to really reassess that and how best you can use those resources? And obviously museums are part of the post-COVID world, which means that some of the impact will be felt by them as well in terms of pressures in public finances and the, you know, the kind of ongoing kind of recovery situation. And I guess to reflect as well a lot of what Emmy's covered there, I suppose museums are places for dialogue and helping people to process some of those kind of complexities around climate change and societal change and so on, and just spaces for reflection. So I think, again, really important for us to think more deeply about what that might mean and what that process of dialogue might mean. I think, you know, it's fascinating looking at American politics right now, and you kind of think, what can the appeal of Trump possibly be for people? I think in some way it's like a license to be delusional and just switch off the complexities of life. And so I think, you know, there's something about how do we support people to grasp and get their heads around all of these really big complex problems that nobody's really got the solution to at the moment, but we have to tackle together. And climate change is probably, you know, one of the biggest ones.
Thanks, Margaret. That's brilliant. The issue around complexity, I think, is a really sort of fruitful area for museums to, you know, to pursue. And certainly Elaine Gurian, who's due on the you know, on the bill of the conference later, it's either later today or certainly later in the week, has spoken at length about complexity and how museums are, you know, are places where complexity can be discussed and you know, really sort of burrowed into. So thank you for that. Lynn, what's your post-COVID vision in Barnes?
Well, before COVID, we'd set ourselves a challenge as part of our Great Place programme to change city region policy. So, you know, not really a very big challenge. because culture really does, and museums don't feature at all in the economic plans being made in Sheffield City region. And this was a source of great frustration to myself and colleagues in the other authorities in South Yorkshire. So we went direct to the Mayor, Dan Jarvis, for action. And Dan's previous, he was shadow culture secretary at one point. So he had a good grasp and understanding of culture and why it was important. So that culminated in him sponsoring a report which was published a few weeks ago about the value of culture and the role museums and the rest of the cultural sector can play in South Yorkshire. And the timing of that actually is brilliant, because it very much can now play into the recovery plans for the city region. So that's, and he's actually going to be appointing a member of in the city region to take that forward and make sure that it is embedded into the economic plans and into the city region's recovery plan. So this is great timing and really great news, and shows culture really is vital to every aspect of our recovery. And it's been great because Barnsley's continued to invest heavily in us through COVID, so they've recognised the role that the museums have played in the digital offer, in the helping to support vulnerable people, so sending packs into care homes and to vulnerable families, but also investing heavily in changing the facilities themselves and how they're going to look kind of post-COVID. So, you know, we're very interactive spaces, so how do we deal with that? The value of our green spaces as well. I mean, we've been overwhelmed, been busier in our parks than we've ever been, and that the value is very, very clear. So I think there's lots of things that have happened during the pandemic that we can draw on and really evidence that these are the things that are really important to people and need to be invested in going forward. And just one last quick thing from me. I mean, the fact now we're building in Barnsley a big new retail development, bad timing, opens next year, but the leader has come to cultural services and said, I need to invest in a big new cultural programme for the town centre. I need units in this new retail development that have pop-up museums, maker spaces, etc. And for me, that's just brilliant, because that is something I never would have expected to hear 20 years ago. So the importance of culture to the high street is an argument that you're really pushing at an open door now, I think.
Thank you. Then the argument of museums and culture being absolutely central to the revisioning of the high street is a really powerful one. And my colleagues up and down the country who are working in cities and towns are finding that argument is becoming much more well, there's a much more preparedness to listen to that argument now than perhaps there was a year ago. There was a really nice question in the Q&A that I think Emmy did answer, but I was going to ask all the other panels as well. And this was, if there was one thing you could say on how to influence, advocate for museums to your early career self, what would that be? So Emmy's already answered it in the chat, so can I ask Lynn?
Yeah, I'd probably be a bit less pretentious. A little bit less academic about it all, and really just think about how museums don't, you can't just say museums exist just for the, we want them to exist just because they're nice stuff, and we deserve to be there and we deserve a place at the table. I think that's the kind of attitude I had in my 20s and 30s, and now I understand that it's much more complex than that, and it's about really making the case and accepting that you have to make the case.
Great, thank you. Maura?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that from Lynn. We've got to be useful to other people and help others with the solutions to their problems. I suppose a general bit of advice, I suppose, at any point in your career is don't wait to be asked for how you want to influence things. It might feel awkward to be in a more junior position and send somebody senior a briefing paper saying, unannounced and uninvited, saying, I just thought I'd send you my ideas about X, Y, Z, whatever it might be. But don't feel shy about it. If you've got an idea that you're sitting on and you need it to get through to somebody, just find your way of doing that.
Right, thank you. Ask forgiveness, not permission, says Kelly Forbes. But I think we could all amen to all of that. Right, so we've come to the end of our hour, so thank you very much to the panelists, to Lynn, Morag and Emmy. I hope there's been quite a lot of chat in the chat function, which is great to see. A big apologies if I haven't managed to ask all the questions that you put forward. I think some of our panel did actually answer in the chat, so thank you for that. And thank you all for coming and listening. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tony. That was a really fascinating discussion and so useful, especially in the current climate. Very inspirational to hear all those tips, and I'm sure people will take a lot away from that. Thank you so much to all our speakers, and thank you to everyone who came to the session. Next up, we have the Superpower of Feminist Leadership, which is chaired by Adele Patrick of Glasgow Women's Library. It's a really exciting one. It starts at 2:45, so there's just enough time to go and grab yourself a cup of tea, and see you there. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.